Hi, I'm Eric. I am the Gray Goat. You're in the Gray Goat Garage, and we're powered by ombwarehouse.com. Today we're working with Coleman Powersports, our favorite mini bike manufacturer, and we're getting these bikes. We've got this one assembled, but we're going to install the OMB Warehouse Stage 2 Performance Kit. It's one thing that you can do that's going to transform this bike into something that's much easier to ride. You'll have a lot more low-end torque, and you'll have a little bit better top speed with the variable pitch design of the torque converter. So let's come take a look at the parts from this kit. This is exactly how this was shipped to me, and we've got the header pipe and the exhaust, the muffler. We've got the crank adapter kit here. We've got a hardware kit for the Stage 2 kit. This carburetor is a non-EPA style carburetor. You'll notice it has additional adjustment for the low to mid-range air-fuel mixture, and it has an easily changed out main jet that the Coleman carburetor doesn't have. The Coleman carburetor has a main jet that has a one-way screw in it, and very hard to remove, very hard to change the jets, and you don't have the adjustability of this carburetor. So this is a nice little addition to the kit. In this kit we have the hardware and gaskets. You'll notice that says gasket, and we've got gaskets. Don't throw these away. There's gaskets inside. We do that to protect the product. Okay, so just in case your Coleman bike needs standard SAE hardware, we include the hardware for the torque converter kit should you need the SAE hardware. I don't believe we're going to need it on this bike, but we'll get to that in our second video. In this bag here, there's a bracket with a small screw. So this is the choke hold bracket that's going to hold this choke lever on the carburetor once we get rid of the stock air box. Here's the billet air filter adapter that's going to allow you to use a K&N style filter like this. And the thing with this filter, that filter has not been oiled. We're going to oil that filter with K&N air filter oil. This is available at most auto parts stores nationwide. It's very easy to find. This filter is not effective unless it's oiled. So let's make sure that we oil our filters. We've got the correct length chain for when we install our riser plate and the torque converter. We give you an extra gasket that you may or may not need, but we want to make sure that you have it if you do need it. And you're going to see a main jet that's labeled GX390. Well, a 0.037 inch main jet is the stock main jet for a GX390. So don't be alarmed if you see that it says GX390, because this is the correct jet for this carburetor. This carburetor comes with a stock size 0.028 inch jet, which once we open up the engine and allow more air in and out with the air filter and the header pipe, that we need to put more fuel into the engine to allow it to run right. So we've got our lock nuts for the billet air filter adapter, and we've got the Autolite racing spark plug. You'll notice this is a surface gap plug. It does not need to be gapped. All you do is install it and run it. So there is no spec for a gap on this because there's no way to gap it. Okay, so we're gonna, like I tell my kids, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Okay, so we're gonna approach this kit in sections. We're gonna take a look and say, okay, well, we have the exhaust pipe that we need to install, so we're gonna get that installed. We're gonna start by taking off the stock muffler. You'll need a 13mm wrench for that. So we're going to start by removing the stock muffler, which is right here. Anybody that's seen Gray Goat Garage knows that I use power tools only when I'm taking stuff apart. I never use socket or impact wrenches to put things together. Okay, we'll just take the stock muffler. Not going to use it. We're going to take the stock exhaust gasket off, and then we're going to open up our packets that say gaskets, and we're going to find the correct gasket for the header pipe. Be careful when you're doing this. Don't cut yourself. I'm a trained professional. Well, there's intake gaskets. And there's our new exhaust gasket. So make sure that the flat part of the D on the gasket matches the flat part of the D on the cylinder head. Now we can go ahead and snake our exhaust pipe through to the other side. Set it over the studs. We'll get the nuts on. And these are 13 millimeter, so we're going to use a 13 millimeter wrench to tighten these down. Probably should go back to a ratchet with an extension on the other one, but we'll get her there. Now, these do not come painted. These come raw steel. And I've already painted this with VHT brand high temp paint. I don't want my stuff getting all rusty. I want it to stay nice looking. Okay, so that's all it takes to put the header on. Now we're going to go to the other side of the bike here. We're going to remove the stock air box. That would be a 10 millimeter wrench or socket. Now this air box has a hose that runs into the valve cover. The valve cover is the silver piece that says OHV on it. Well, we're going to move these levers here on the carb so we can get this pulled off and the levers don't go flying. And the air box pulled off, and I have the breather hoses attached here. We're going to want to put this back into the valve cover. Okay, so now that I have the air box off, we have a rubber gasket that's going to come off the studs first. This is the same gasket that we include in the kit, so you're not going to have to duplicate this. You've got an extra one now. Okay, so right now we're not going to go any further on the carburetor here until we start addressing the new carburetor that we're going to install in this engine. The non-EPA carburetor is going to give you a lot better throttle response, more tunability. So to get this carburetor ready to go, we're going to take a 10 millimeter wrench and we're going to unscrew the bowl nut. Try and leave the O-rings in place. And then we're going to take a flat blade screwdriver, and you'll notice this is a cheap screwdriver, and I don't like cheap tools, but I did that because I ground the edges down on this so it fits easily into the body of this carburetor. And then I'm just going to turn counterclockwise and remove the main jet in the carburetor. There's two components in here. There's the main jet that we're taking out now, but there's also what's called an emulsion tube, which is up above this. If the emulsion tube falls out, don't panic. We'll just put it back in. Okay, here's the old main jet. What I want you to do is take and put this somewhere other than our GX390 main jet. There's also an emulsion tube, like I said, that can come out. And see, this is a common issue. If your float comes out and your needle comes out of the seat, take and put it back. Just the way you found it. Okay? Because the needle is going to cut off the flow of fuel into the carburetor. So we have to be able to get that installed correctly for the carburetor to work correctly. Okay. So the emulsion tube is still inside the carburetor. We're going to take out this GX390 jet, which is a 0.037 inch main jet. And this jet is great for altitudes anywhere from sea level to about 3,000 feet. Anything different than that, you can send me an email, help@ombwarehouse.com. Put Gray Goat in the subject line, and I'll do my best to get you the right jetting for your area. We're not going to go crazy snugging this down. We're just going to get it tight. What you need to see is that little brass piece in the bottom of the venturi coming up into the carburetor. That way you know the emulsion tube is all the way in the carb, the main jet is where it's supposed to be, and then we can reassemble this carburetor. So make sure the pin is here and the float's operating properly, and then we can put this bowl back on. I'm going to gently put this in there so the O-ring goes in the groove. I want to turn this so the drain plug is easily accessible once this is back installed on the engine. So we'll put the bowl attachment nut back on. And again, this is just O-rings, so we don't have to go gorilla tight on this. Just get it snug and no more. So now this carburetor is ready to install on this vehicle after we do one more step. So the last thing we want to do is get a rough adjustment on this carburetor so we know that we can get running as soon as we put this back on the engine. So with this brass screw here that controls the air-fuel mixture for the low to mid-range fuel signal, we're going to gently turn this screw all the way into the body of the carburetor, going clockwise, just until it seats into the carburetor. Don't jump on it, you can break the inside of the carb. So once we're there, we're going to go out 1.5 turns. So there's a half, there's 1, there's 1.5. That's going to be my baseline setting for this carburetor. This screw here on the top of the carb, that's for a mechanical adjustment for the carburetor. As I turn that screw in, it's going to open up the butterfly in this carburetor and allow more air and fuel into the engine. So we can leave it as is for right now, and then we'll go ahead and get this installed on the engine. The billet adapter, you're going to notice there's a threaded hole here. That's where the screw attaches the bracket. This bracket has a large round hole and a small oblong hole. We're going to put that screw in the small oblong hole, and make sure you have a 1/8 inch Allen wrench, because we're going to need to tighten this down. But this is also helpful to do beforehand, because it's hard to put that screw in with this on the engine. But this is also going to tell us what side of this adapter goes up and down. So now we can go ahead and get this installed. We're going to take everything that we're not going to use, get it out of our way, and go back to the engine. If you have fuel in your gas tank, as soon as you undo this hose here from the gas tank to the carb, you're going to have fuel all over. So either have a way to plug that line off or pinch it off. Don't destroy the hose, but be careful with gasoline. You know, if you spill gas, wipe it up right away. Make sure you take care of it. So we're going to take some pliers, and we're going to undo the clip on the hose just by squeezing the ends together and moving it up, and the hose is off. Okay, that's the choke lever from the stock carb. We don't have to reuse that. Once we have the carb back off away from the engine, we can lift the throttle rod out, and we can undo the spring, which is called the fine regulation spring. So with that, we can pull the carburetor off the engine and the gasket. I never reuse old gaskets. I always want new gaskets on whatever I'm working on. This is a plastic spacer, which also insulates the carburetor from heat. This has to be on this engine for this engine to run properly. If you think you're a junior engineer and you don't want to use this, you're always going to have a vacuum leak. Your engine's never going to run properly. So now we're going to use the new gaskets that we've included for you. And you'll notice there's a flat part of the D on that port right there. You have to match this gasket to that flat part of the D. Get it onto the studs without ripping it. Slide it all the way up against the head. Make sure that it matches. The plastic spacer has two distinctly different sides. One side has a channel in it. That's the overflow for the carb. The other side has that same D-shaped port. So if you have any residue on there from the old gasket, clean it up, make it look good. And we're going to install this just as it came off. This is just a simple carb replacement. There's no magic, nothing special here. But we need to look at how the old carb came off and install the new carb in the same manner. Now we've got another gasket that is going to go on to the studs. There's a gasket on both sides of the plastic spacer. So get this on the stud. Make sure that the small hole is at the top of the gasket. So that's where the overflow on the carburetor comes out. We'll slide our brand new carburetor on. Once we get this on, we're going to start the fuel line on there, but not push it all the way on yet. Just get it started, because we have to attach our throttle rod to the top of the carb, and that just goes into the slot, and then we're going to attach the fine regulation spring. I'll get some pliers for that so you don't have to see my fat fingers. Right into the top of the carburetor. Make sure that that end is not coming undone. Now we can finish sliding the carburetor on. Push the hose down onto the carb as far as you can. Then we can come back to our pliers. Grab the clamp, open up the clamp, and then we're going to push that line onto the carburetor as far as we can. Okay? So now that's all there is to it, is swapping that carburetor out. So we want to make sure that the line, the ignition wire, is in the holder on the plastic spacer. And now we can install our billet air filter adapter after we put on this metal spacer. And we have to make sure we install it correctly. It can go on either direction, but it is very specific about how it needs to go on. Once you slide that on, you'll notice that this little cutout here needs to give that hole some air space, if you will. So once we're on there, we're going to put our choke lever, and this just sits down over the top of the carburetor. There's a stud there, and there's a pin that's going to index into the top of the carburetor. Once that's there, we can put on our billet air filter adapter. And now that we're there, we include lock nuts. So we'll get our lock nuts started, and then we're going to take a 10mm socket and tighten these down. What we need to consider is we're not going to tighten one side and then go to the other. We're going to do it in steps. Okay, the nut's just starting to touch the adapter now. We're going to go back to the other nut. We're getting snug here. We'll go back to the other side. Get snug here. One thing I learned with small engines, I use small tools. If I had a nickel for every bolt that I broke with bigger tools, I'd be a rich man and not a YouTube sensation. So once those are snugged down, our carburetor's done. We'll put our air cleaner on here in a minute. We'll actually put our air cleaner on now. Like I said, this is not oiled right now, so you will need to oil this filter. This filter has a 20-degree angled boot, so you can mount it any direction you want to. If you want to turn it down, there's no harm done with that. any direction that you're comfortable with. I'm going to turn mine back so we have the most amount of leg room in case my leg's hanging down. Make sure that the boot is squarely onto the carburetor or the billet adapter. And then I'm going to take a screwdriver, make sure that the clamp is up against the end of the boot where we can get it good and tight. We just need to snug this up. Go Gorilla tight on this, it's going to rip this boot, and I can't be responsible for that. So last thing for the Stage 2 kit is to just pull off the spark plug cap. We need to take the stock spark plug out. If anybody comes to visit the Gray Goat Garage, you're going to notice that I have a whole bunch of brand new spark plugs stuck in the pegboard that I hang my wrenches on. I don't use the stock spark plugs for anything other than decoration. They're an inexpensive spark plug. They are not the greatest deal. We're going to use the Autolite AR3910X racing spark plug. These give you a great fire, easy starts. And I mean, it's truly just unscrew the old one, screw this one back in. Okay, we're going to get this snug, and then we're going to go about another 2/3 of a turn. Don't go too tight on that. It's easy to pull the threads out of the cylinder head. Okay, so last thing we have to do is get the choke bracket adjusted and tightened. This is with a 1/8 wrench. Get the wrench on the button head Allen. So now that we're in here, we're just going to tighten this down. And again, not Gorilla tight, but this needs to be snug enough that we don't strip out the bolt, because if you don't have a choke lever, makes your life not quite as easy. So make sure the bracket is over the top cone shaped of the choke lever. Snug this down. Probably be easier without the header on there. Okay, so push down and make sure the cone is in the hole on the top of the choke bracket. Snug it down, and that's all there is to it. So now all we have left is this hose. This is the tube that comes out of the valve cover. This is the only thing that we didn't include in the kit, is a filter for this. As the engine rotates and is running, it makes pressure inside the engine. This is to relieve pressure. I like to put a filter on these, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. We have small K&N style filters. We have a small filter that you can just plug in the hose and secure with a zip tie. So this hose just pushes back into the valve cover. If you don't ride in dusty conditions, then leave it open. It doesn't matter. It just needs to vent air out. Don't plug this line. It has to stay like this. That's all there is to installing a Stage 2 kit on a Coleman BT200X. I am Eric. I am the Gray Goat. You're in the Gray Goat Garage. We're powered by OMB Warehouse, but we've got the guys from Coleman supporting us as well. So thank you for watching.